Okay, welcome everybody to our AutismBC talk with CLBC on eligibility and services. Today, we're glad to have three very experienced representatives from CLBC with us. Cysn Fasse, CLBC Eligibility Facilitator, Patrice Strike, CLBC Policy Analyst and CLBC's Provincial Eligibility Lead, and Catriona Johnson, Manager Policy and Government Relations, CLBC. They're here to talk about CLBC Adult Services for Autism. To briefly introduce them, Catriona Johnson is the new Manager of Policy and Government Relations at CLBC and has worked in the community living field for over 25 years in both Canada and US. Catriona has an adult son with autism and is the former chair of both the Howard County Autism Society and Autism Society of America. Cysn Fasse is the CLBC Eligibility Facilitator for Vancouver Coastal West Region. She has worked for the Provincial Government for over 22 years, and specifically CLBC since 2008. She was the Personal Support Initiative Facilitator for this region when the program first started in 2012. Patrice Strike is a CLBC Policy Analyst and CLBC's Provincial Eligibility Lead. She provides policy and practice guidance to internal and external stakeholders, including CLBC staff, management, and psychologists with whom CLBC works. She has graduate degrees in arts, where she developed her research and communication skills. She has worked in social and disability services and policy for 20 years. Welcome, Catriona, Cysn, and Patrice to our AutismBC talk. So, Cysn, can you briefly tell us what is the eligibility criteria of CLBC services? Are there any services specifically for autism?
Okay, so there is two programs. One is intellectual disability, and the other one is personal supports initiative, which you need a diagnosis of autism or FASD. For intellectual disability, which is our main program, we have three sets basically of criteria, which is decided by a psychologist. The first would be the IQ above 70. Second would be adaptive functioning. So that would be as well around 70, and that's daily living skills. And the third is age of onset, and that is prior to age 18. For PSI, we look at that. That's the first thing, is we look and rule out intellectual disability. Second is the adaptive functioning, and that has to be a score of 55 or less. So it is extremely low, an extremely low level. And the third is official FASD and or autism diagnosis. And again, like I said, it does have to be done by a psychologist. So we need a psychological report.
Okay, so if you have an FASD or autism diagnosis, you still have to have an adaptive functioning under 55.
Yeah, so unfortunately, most people with higher functioning autism or FASD are often not eligible for CLBC services. Yeah, we work with individuals in the 0.1 or percentile of low adaptive functioning.
I see. Okay. Is there, like, I hear people advocating for pulling the adaptive functioning up to 70, which is a general, like, intellectual disability adaptive functioning. Is that something they would consider if you have a normal IQ?
I think they looked at it since the beginning. When I remember being in the talks in the beginning and looking at that. You know, and that's way above me, the discussions about that. But I do know, here are things like, perhaps they'll do it, but it'll be a different way, such as, yeah, and all this kind of stuff. But everyone knows that if you have an adaptive somebody, there is some services needed. It's just a matter of where, how, and things like that. And like I said, that's way, way above me, the discussions, right?
I see. So my second question for you, Cysn, is we heard about GSA, but what exactly is GSA, and does GSA level decide your level of services you receive in terms of hours and money from CLBC?
Yeah, so GSA is how we determine how much services So we try to make sure that people with similar disabilities levels have similar services. There are 5 Gsa levels. Basically, 1 would be pretty independent, while 5 is totally dependent. This is determined with your facilitator. So basically, you would meet with a facilitator, and it might be over several meetings to go through the 10 categories and questions about the level of need and how much is needed. Did you want me to expand a bit more?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, yeah, so there's 5 levels of needs, right? There's several questions. I haven't done it for 10 years, to be honest, but my colleagues are experts at it. For example, residential services, right? The level 1, you'll probably be pretty independent, maybe having somebody checking in you once a week, while 5 is 24/7 group home, full-time care, or at home full-time care, overnight awake. Yeah, there's also flags as well for temporary issues, or most cases, hopefully temporary issues. So there's things that don't meet any of the 10 categories, and that's when we would look at flags. And like I said, this is over several meetings that you would have with your facilitator in conjunction. They'll go over each question with you together.
Mm-hmm. But can you change the GSA level during your services with CLBC?
Yes, of course. In both ways. Yes. So basically, it's fluid. It's a moment in time, right, of what's going on, and then if things change, we age. So there would be changing just because of the aging process. So we do, yeah. So it is an ongoing thing, and if things change, you definitely need to connect with the facilitator.
Okay, so it will be the facilitator you talk to if like something happened in the family, or he has some sudden change. Then you can ask for a change.
Okay. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Okay, so my next question is, when we're in children's services with MCFD, we only have one CYSN worker. But when it comes to adult services, it seems to be like everybody is doing their thing. So we don't really know who is the first person we want to talk to regarding when you're transitioning into adult services or you first apply for services. So like, who is the first person we should talk to? And what does analyst or facilitator take care of each? I think this question goes to Patrice.
Right. Well, we're hoping that the first CLBC staff that you talk to are at a welcome workshop, and Catriona will be talking more about those later. Preferably they are, but if they're not, you may be speaking to an intake facilitator at CLBC. So, for instance, if you're not connected with the Ministry of Children and Families, if you were to approach us directly, you would speak to be an intake facilitator. And they're the ones that take your basic information and get a team assistant to help you, and then refer you to an eligibility facilitator. And that can start as early as age 16. So there's plenty of time to do planning before CLBC services would kick in at 19 if you're eligible. So once you're determined eligible, you're assigned a facilitator, and that facilitator will work with you to plan, will work with the individual and the family plan, including doing the GSA and over time changing. You may not have the same facilitator, but it would be a facilitator, someone who does that work, who works with families. And they will also look at help you to connect to not just to our supports, but also to community supports if those are a better fit. And the facilitator actually will work with the analyst. That's someone that the family won't have a lot of contact with, probably, because the analyst side is to work with service providers. And the analyst has a very important role in the safeguarding of individuals, because not only are they working with contracting with service providers, but we also have a very robust monitoring program. So the analyst will be monitoring the money part, the the contract, performance of the contract part, but also monitoring the individual situation.
I see. So like if you're going through, say, an agency services, chances are you don't really have any contact with analysts, right? So analysts only work with agencies?
Yeah, or they might be working directly if there are any direct home share providers. I think there are on the island. Yeah, so they're working behind the scenes. So the ones that families and individuals will work with are the facilitators.
I see. So you said the process can start as early as 16, but who do you contact at 16? Is it directly to CLBC or still talk to your CYSN worker?
Yeah, you should be speaking to your CYSN worker. If for some reason, though, you're a family that is not connected with children and families, maybe you've come from somewhere else or, some unusual situation, then you would contact CLBC directly.
Okay. So is there an agency or like a government department that can walk you through this transition? Is that the person we should talk to when you're transitioning?
STAD is housed within the Ministry of Children and Families. So if it's available to you, the CYSN worker should be connecting you, but STAD is only available in certain regions. And right now, I'm not actually sure where they are operating. Maybe Susan or Catriona can add to this.
Yeah, they're expanding. They have expanded from the original 3 sites that where they first started, but they, as Patrice says, they are not throughout the whole province. They also will only support people once you're eligible for CLBC services. So you have to do eligibility before you can access a STAD navigator. So that's an important piece to understand.
In Vancouver, we Coastal West, we do not have a STAD worker.
I see.
So, yeah.
Likewise, Victoria. I live in Victoria, and there's no STAD navigator in the Victoria, but there is in Nanaimo. So.
Okay, so like the first thing, if you're transitioning from children's services to adult services at 16, you should contact your CYSN worker and connect with CLBC. If you're transitioning. But if you're, not connected with MCFD at all, you can call CLBC directly when you're 16. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So my next question is, when we come to CLBC office, it seems to be like everything is on the family or the caretaker. And we don't really know how do CLBC offer services. Is it like when you're kids, you have school, you have your agency to take care of, like, say, respite and out of school. But like, how do CLBC offer their services? Is it usually through an agency in community inclusion, respite, residential? Is it through one agency or multiple agency? Or do families have a choice if they want to get services in other ways, or like how it can be delivered? Catriona?
Thanks. And I'm just going to apologize. I have a clock in the room and it may ding in the next minute. I noticed it's about 1:15, so I apologize for that. So services are provided in multiple ways. They can be through agencies. That's the most common way that people receive their services. But they can also receive services through what's called individualized funding, which some of you may have heard of, as well as person-centered societies and or microboards. And they can be connected to and understand more about person-centered society and microboards through Vela Canada, which provides some support to families who want to set those up. What services people get is, is depending on what they need and what they're requesting. So there's 4 major categories in what's called a catalog of services. There's residential services. There we go. There's employment. There's community inclusion. And respite, and then we have a few other services as well. And what I'd really like to recommend to people, even if people are already over 19 and are already receiving some services, is maybe to attend one of the welcome workshops that Patrice mentioned earlier. 2 years ago, CLBC went through a process of redesigning the way it's provided information and welcomed individuals to CLBC services. And one of the things that came out of the research and the design process process was a 4-workshop series called the Welcome Workshop Series. And the first one sort of gives a bit of a difference between what is the childhood landscape versus the adult landscape. The second workshop looks at community resources and how you can recognize welcoming and inclusive places in your own communities that might be a support, as well as the third one is on planning. And there's multiple ways that people can plan and multiple people that people can plan with. So really looking at that, as well as the final one, which we call the real deal. And that is about the sort of ins and out of what are CLBC's processes, that guide to support allocation, the GSA, as well as the priority tool. And then what services does actually CLBC provide and what's available to people. So even if you are in services, I think it's a good opportunity to update yourself on what's available and how that is working. It's also meant typically outside of COVID times to be done in groups of families and individuals. So it's an opportunity to meet with other individuals and families. And there's all sorts of things that we all know can happen creatively when families get together. Right now it is available virtually, so also very, very convenient. So you may want to look at where you might be able to access that and go ahead and take it, just to bring yourself update on all the processes and services that CLBC offers.
Thank you. And okay, so we talked about eligibility, but if they're not eligible for CLBC services, or can they reapply for CLBC services if they are not happy with the decision, or can they appeal? And what if they are not eligible for CLBC services? Where can they get help? Will the facilitator still help them to explore community options?
So for, like I said in the beginning, it's done by a psychologist, right? So basically it's based on a diagnosis. So the question is, do you have this diagnosis? You'll be eligible for CLBC. CLBC may be an option, right? As opposed to, I need these kinds of services. How do I make myself fit into it, right? That's a big difference with CLBC eligibility compared to other programs you may be trying to get, is that we are based on diagnoses, right? So you either have that diagnosis or not. Because of that, there isn't really an appeal process. We do have a complaint process to go through. However, with, again, eligibility, it's based on diagnosis. So it's based on a psychological assessment. With personal supports initiative, the adaptive functioning, I do always recommend that people apply, because we can now in PSI look at adaptive, and you can have another conversation with CLBC for that. But again, it is based on adaptive functioning assessments completed by psychologists. So yeah. Did you want me to go into the second part of the question?
Yes, please.
So, so quite often when people come to me, it's because they're looking for things such as housing, or something happened, or they're not getting services that they need from elsewhere. Quite often mental health, they're calling me, they're not finding that it's going there. So I have to refer them back to mental health and maybe, go through their complaint process. They have a similar one right here as well. Other things too is, for example, a big one, I guess, brain injury, right? Yeah. So they were doing well. They had a brain injury. So I say, have you retouched with, or have you had a conversation with the BC Brain Injury Program? So I try to that's the first place I go. I always also, another big one's planning. So a Plan BC, I find I've gotten good comments from people that they are quite helpful in helping families plan. And then I also refer to the two big ones, is Family Supports Institute and ActBC, because they have those good databases, and those are always updated to date. I'm not. So I try to be, and I always ask, if anyone hears about any good ones, please, tell me, so I can have more options to give families and individuals. But I always refer to those ones because, and the other good thing too with Family Support Institute is that they have outreach parents, right? Resource parents, sorry, they're called resource parents. So they can get a voice to talk to. And same with Plan BC has an emergency, I forgot what they call it, line. And that one you call and leave a message and they'll call you back in 24 hours.
Nice.
So those, but like I said, we're always looking for, yeah, and I'm sure everyone is, right? And I try to keep up to date, but yeah, and they also come and go. So I always ask families too, like if I refer to someone and they don't find them useful, to make sure that they inform me or if they don't.
I see. So if they're not eligible for like full CLBC services, they can still call up the office and ask for advice or community resources.
Yeah, we will always look at any new documents, and quite often it is complex situations. So I call Patrice and find out, and we have a conversation about the new documents. We do have that age of onset criteria for intellectual disability of age of 18. Right. So that's, but like I said, we will look at any new documentation. Individuals look different and complex, and I've been doing this for 10 years and there's things I've never seen before. And scores I've never seen before. I do just going back to also eligibility, I do have a checklist that I have to go through, right? So my job is actually not to really interpret the assessment, but I have a checklist just to give me things like, is there any questions with validity of test, effort of test, things like that. And if I have any of those questions, again, that's when I, call up Patrice or pop her up or send her an email.
I see.
So I keep her busy.
Yeah. I actually have a question for Patrice regarding the flags from one of my coworkers, because you'd say you can have different GSA level, but some with flags. So can you elaborate more about like what the flag means?
Sure. And Susan, if you find you want to add to this, so flags are, so we have the GSA, the Guide to Support Allocation, and then, that gives us a level of need. But then because people, as Susan says, are so complex, there may be a situation that doesn't, or an additional factor that doesn't really, that either exacerbates one of the domains or is additional to one of the domains that, indicates extra support is needed, and it could be temporary or it could be ongoing. And then that is considered when we're considering supports, like we recognize that additional factor and try to, and provide the supports, look for the supports that will meet that need.
Mm-hmm. So the flag is presumably can be removed later, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we hope it's a temporary situation. It often is from a crisis. That's a big one, right? So something happened, somehow some unusual behavior came out that's quite challenging. So we try to reduce that behavior. The flag is extra funding to reduce that behavior. So it's quite often things like that. Could be some homelessness things, but mainly it's behavioral line that I can think of. Of course, there's other flags there too. But usually, hopefully, it's temporary.
I see.
Otherwise, it's a change in the GSA level, right?
I see. That's what the next question. If it is not able to remove, so you would go to the next GSA level.
Yeah, then we would have definitely another conversation about the GSA. We look at it and stuff.
How they change. Yeah,
I see.
And then in some cases too, with the GS level, as we increase it, we also decrease them too, which because things are going well, right? Mm-hmm. So it does go both ways, thankfully, sometimes too. So yeah.
Okay. So that's really helpful. And the last time we had a talk with Ross, the CEO of CLBC, and we have a lot of questions from families, and we were not able to answer because of the time. But one major question that popped up was like one specific question they want to talk about is if an individual does not have intellectual delay, but has adaptive functioning deficits, the CLBC manager can make the exception to policy to do an autism assessment. Is that true, Catriona?
Yeah, hold on a second. I had my notes and so, CLBC is a Crown agency, and so it receives a certain amount of funding each year. And as a Crown, it is actually not allowed to go over budget in the same way that maybe a ministry is allowed to go over budget. And, we increase the population of individuals we serve about 5% every year. However, we don't get 5%, the equivalent budget increases every year. So it is always an issue of how do we manage our resources. And so it is unusual for us to pay for an ASD assessment, for example, for an adult. It isn't something that we typically do. And that's why we really, really encourage people, particularly who are transitioning out of school, to get those assessments done, right, as part of that transition process and prior to them turning age 19. So, there may be occasions in unusual circumstances where an individual it comes to us as an adult, and there's a strong indication in their history, in the documents that we receive, that there may be of something missed, something previously, and then that would be looked at on a case-by-case basis to see. But as I say, the real recommendation is, if you're coming up through the school system, try and get your assessments all done before the age of 19, so that you're ready to go when you become an adult.
I see. So, like, if an adult left school for a while, have like strong indicators of being on the spectrum, there's still a chance that you can make that exception.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's very much dependent on resources. As you can imagine, there's people waiting for services and people who are waiting for assessments. So it really depends on the budget year, on kind of what things are looking like for the year, and the availability of the resources to do that. So if there's other ways that you can fund that through education, through other mechanisms, if you have private health or anything of that sort, those would be the ways to go.
Can I just add to that we would only pursue an ASD assessment if we thought someone might be eligible for our services. If we think they're not going to be eligible for CLBC services, we won't, fund an ASD assessment. And also, prior to that, we would fund it if they met the other criteria that Catriona has mentioned. It was those situations, but if they're adaptive, if we know they're adaptive to meet our criteria, because if they have an ASD diagnosis but they don't meet our adaptive criteria, they're still not going to be eligible. So we would want to know that they met that adaptive before. That would be one of the criteria for pursuing an ASD assessment.
Okay.
Thanks, Patrice.
Okay, so our next question from last time that is like major was on housing. And the first question that I have is, how many units of subsidized housing are there? What is the wait list like?
You want me to take that one then? So yeah, a couple of things about housing. First of all, BC Housing actually manages subsidized housing in British Columbia, not CLBC, although we view BC Housing as a partner, and we work as closely as we can with BC Housing on sort of trying to get more housing available to individuals that we support. But I did want to sort of highlight for you all some work that's happening around the housing. So in December, we released a research report that showed the need for approximately 5,000 units of subsidized housing over the next 5 years. And that report was done in conjunction with the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and provides some really interesting information from individuals, families, and others about their housing needs, their housing desires, what they can afford, those and what kind of supports they would need to be in their housing. So I'd highly recommend that people take a look at that report, and also look at the resources on the website keytohomebc.ca. Over 800 people responded to that survey, so really good showing of information, so great validity. And And on that website as well are a series of documents for individuals and families, including a housing planning template, that if you are interested in housing, if you're sort of beginning to think this process for, the next coming years, that you may want to look at that planning document and use those resources. And you can also sign up on that site to receive updates. We haven't had a lot yet, but should we begin to get more housing information out there, it means you would be on the email list to receive that information. So highly recommend.
I see. So we know that BC Housing is managing a lot of, low income housing, but not all individuals with diverse abilities can live in those housing without support. So how do we get more communities to buy into the idea of creating housing for individuals with diverse abilities?
Great question. So one of the things you'll note on that website is a bit of an engagement campaign. This came out of the Inclusive Housing Task Force from a couple of years ago, which came up with a 3-year work plan on how to increase inclusive housing for individuals. And one of the things we recognize is there's only so much you can do at a provincial level. Much of housing work and housing advocacy happens at the local and regional levels. And so what we did was develop a little bit of information that people can take to their city councils, to their mayors, to their the professionals who are doing zoning, to their bands if they're in Indigenous communities, to begin talking about it. So there's a video, first of all, on that website that can be used and shared with housing decision makers, elected officials. There's also a template for a PowerPoint presentation, and the idea was that essentially you could take some information from the research report, for example, the people that you know in your community, and be able to make a presentation to elected officials and housing decision makers about the need to develop more inclusive housing. And really that is sort of that question of, as things are being developed, decisions are being developed in your community, are they going to set aside some subsidized units in those developments, and really advocating that they be available for people with disabilities? So, yeah, great question.
Yeah, and another option we heard of is home share. But what exactly is home share? And I know a lot of families are concerned if their child has high support needs and nonverbal, they won't be able to know something is not going well in the home share. So how can we ensure that we put our children in home share, it's being monitored?
Sure. I'll take that one. So home sharing is part of what's called shared living services, which is under our residential category in our catalog of services. So that includes staffed residential, which are group homes, shared living, which is live-in caregiver or home sharing, and then supported living, which is drop-in support to when people live in their own homes and apartments and that kind of thing. So shared living, actually we have a set of shared living standards right now, which is currently being looked at, updated, and we're just developing home sharing coordination standards, because most home sharing is coordinated by agencies and they monitor what is happening with those home shares. So there's been a real focus in recent years on monitoring. We've in the last couple of years, we've improved our monitoring system. And as we create these standards and revise these standards, there's more and more a focus on home sharing. I think the key thing to remember is that government has a role, obviously, in monitoring, and CLBC has a role, and the agencies it contracts with has a role in monitoring, but families also have a role. We know that there's going to be less problems in any kind of a home sharing situation, that there's going to be, people are going to be safer and happier when families are involved in home sharing. And so we hope very much that relationships are developed between family members and with home sharing providers to really meet everybody's needs and have good communication. So, really as parents, siblings, it's really important to be involved in your individual's lives, no matter where they live and what kind of situation they live, because that is ultimately going to keep people the safest and the happiest.
So you said home share is usually managed by agencies, but can people with individualized funding or microboard monitor that home share?
Can they monitor?
Yeah.
So it's not
like going through them.
Yeah. So it's not typical.
Okay.
Because of the because of the standards, because of the coordination that's needed, because of the monitoring, because of the home studies. There's a lot of complexities that are necessary to home sharing. So home sharing is really almost 100% is done by agency coordination.
I see. So even if you have a contract with CLBC services that is individualized funding, the residential part, if it is home share, it goes to an agency.
That's what typically happens. Yes.
I see. And then we also know that it's really hard to recruit home share providers. What can we do? And what is the wait list for home share right now, like currently in BC?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what the wait list is, the request for service list is. I couldn't tell you what that is at the moment. But we do know that there is a recruitment issue in home sharing. It's hard to find individuals and families. We know particularly this is the case when rents are very high in certain regions. So if you have a suite, for example, in your home and you can rent it out at a very high monthly rental rate, then that seems like a good option for a lot of people. Also, if you can put it onto like an Airbnb or that kind of thing, obviously there's higher returns. But we don't necessarily want people to be in home sharing just for the money, right? There are other reasons that we know that, for example, the most successful home sharing relationships, the longest ones, are ones where people actually had previous relationships. So we have, somebody who was an EA for somebody and then, ended up being their home sharing provider. So they really know that person. We have siblings, for example, who become home sharing providers for their brother or sister. And we know, so it's really that relationship that's the most important thing. CLBC is currently revising its home sharing handbook and creating one for individuals and families in particular, and really looking at sort of what is the most important things about a home sharing. How can you really create a home sharing environment when there's good communication, good relationships, people's rights are taken care of in terms of the individual. And so look for those very soon to come out and support better home sharing and potentially recruit new home sharing providers with one of those handbooks as well.
I see. So what would you say to a family that asks why can't they get paid to take care of their own adult children in their home as they're experts of their children?
Yeah, so it is a policy of CLBC that family members are not paid, direct family members. So a parent, a spouse, a child, for example, are not to be paid, and that policy has been in place, I think, since the beginning of CLBC. It's been a pretty consistent policy. It's fine for siblings. For example, I just mentioned siblings in relation to home sharing. That some of the nicest examples of home sharing are in which siblings have stepped up as adults and supported their adult siblings. So there is an exception to it. One of the reasons is because there is an inherent conflict of interest when you're paid as a parent and your income is dependent on your child. So there are exceptions in sort of extenuating circumstances where a parent can be paid. But again, it has to be really extenuating circumstances.
I see. Okay, so my next popular question is about respite funding. First question is, does every family caregiver of an individual with CLBC get respite funding each month?
Susan or Patrice, do you want me to take this, or do you? We haven't talked about who to take it, so go ahead. You're on mute, so I'll just go. I'll just go ahead and I'll keep talking unless you say otherwise. So everybody receives a minimum of respite, the sort of basic respite services. So some people may not receive respite services itself. They might have a community inclusion service, for example, and I can actually use myself as an example. My son is eligible for CLBC services and receives some community inclusion services, but as a family, we do not receive of respite. So, and there are other families in that same situation. And then there's other families who just have the respite funding or the minimal service funding that they have. So every family, every individual should have assigned some minimal funding, but it might not be respite. They may have some other types of service as well, or a different type of service.
I see. So chances are with that pool of funding, it goes to in community inclusion, like max that out, and you don't have respite funding. Is that true?
It may be. It really looks different for different people. It depends on, people's service requests. It depends on prioritization of services, all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And do PSI stream candidates receive respite funding as well?
Susan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yes, they can. Things between the differences in the beginning, there were way more differences between personal supports initiative and the intellectual disability stream. It is less. With personal supports initiative, we have a bit more stricter in the amount in the funding levels and things like that, but we can be a bit more innovative. And all these things, I was just looking through all the answers with all the respite questions, and the one thing with CLBC is, that we have a finite budget, but we can be a bit more innovative with our services and how we provide that. And it's really one-off, right? Listening to the examples and that you were giving and stuff, that is really entails a conversation with, it's really important to have a conversation with your facilitator about your specific and often unique situation. And we saw a lot of unique situations with this COVID, right, coming up and respite workers and stuff, right? So it's, so we do have ability to be innovative within a certain frame, but a bit more than I think I'm at CFD. So it's hard to answer, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is so different. I highly suggest that you have a conversation with and ask the questions too, because we can explore for sure things and try to be creative as well. So it's good to ask, even if the idea is a bit, I don't want to say out there, but out there, that you just ask, right? Because you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because you talked about, during COVID, is there more flexibility in terms of, using the respite funding? I know you guys put out a document, so it just opened up yesterday, and it's really hard to get respite worker. Can they use it in a more flexible way, like paying family members, carry it forward to the next contract? Is that something feasible?
So yes, there was interim guidance that was put out on December 28th, which gave more flexibility to families in terms of their respite. We did some surveying last year of individuals and families to find out how they were experiencing COVID. And we heard very much that people were having trouble finding respite providers. And, frankly, they were tired, as we all are of this. But if you're supporting somebody, you may be more tired. And so we wanted to make sure family caregivers were resilient. And so one of the things therefore we did was we did interim guidance allowing more flexibility in respite. And I would point people to our website where that interim guidance is located, as well as there's something called an express menu, which talks about some creative ways that you might be able to use the respite funding. So, bringing in somebody to clean your house, for example, so that you're not having to do that extra care involved with cleaning because of, the supporting somebody. Other things that you could do in order to be more creative in terms of use of it. And so during the pandemic, that has been our approach, is to be more flexible with respite. And we're hoping to be able to continue that interim guidance. Right now, it has a June 30th date, but as our CEO, Ross Chilton, announced on one of the FAMI calls that we do every month, that we are looking to try and extend that. We're just working through some of the details right now.
Okay, so right now we have a few questions from the floor. Okay, we talked about flags. So next question from the floor is, if you have a CYSN worker, but they are really busy, can you approach a CLBC intake worker yourself?
I'd say sure, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely. You can always call CLBC.
Okay,
right?
so you don't, like if you are on MCF,
You can always open a file for CLBC.
Oh, okay. So you don't
if it's
really
eligibility
have to go
specific, I would ask to talk to the eligibility facilitator. If it's other stuff, then and you don't have a name of a facilitator, then I would ask to speak to the intake or duty facilitator.
Mm-hmm. We talked about STAD only works with individuals who are eligible for CLBC services. So do they pre-screen you before they go into CLBC services?
Patrice, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think is the question, if the question is, does the CYSN worker screen people who are likely to be eligible? Is that the?
Yeah.
Well, I would say yes, that the CYSN workers, I mean, the fact that you'll have a CYSN worker, indicates that you are very, very likely eligible. And yeah, but they will not be determining eligibility. That what they will be doing is helping to ensure that we have all the information that we need to make our eligibility determination.
Oh, so CYSN worker and STAT will help you to see if you're eligible before they transfer the file.
They will help you provide the information.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure they're doing. Well, I know they're doing a kind of pre-screening because they have asked us if we had any screening tools.
Oh, I see. Okay. And my next question is individualized funding more common in smaller communities like on Vancouver Island?
I'll take this one. I'm a big lover of individualized funding, having worked on the area on individualized funding for many years. It's very commonly used in rural and remote communities because, as you can imagine, the number of agency service providers may be less in that area, so less choice for people. As well as if you're living in a remote community, where travel is quite difficult. It may be harder to have staff, so you might be trying to think really about your own network of people in terms of hiring. So yes, much more I wouldn't say much more common, but more common used in rural and remote communities. Philosophically, though, there's people who really like individualized funding. They like to be able to have that control over the services, over the staff they hire. And so big cities, you see it as well. It's really across the board.
Mm-hmm. But with individualized funding, can you still use an agency if you want to do portion of it?
So there's two ways that you can do individualized funding. You if you have a certain amount of funding. One is direct funded, where you manage the money, hiring, everything kind of yourself. But there's also host agency. So if you have right now over $6,600 worth of services, which is called a standard agreement, you can elect to do a host agency, and a host agency will then assist you in terms of managing the money, paying the bills, paying the staff, making sure their criminal record checks are done, all of those kinds of things. So for people who don't want to manage themselves, they can elect to do a host agency in individualized funding service.
I see. So like parents don't have to be a CEO of an organization.
That's exactly it. Some of us want to be the CEO and some of us do not.
Okay. We want the flexibility, but we don't want to be a CEO. Then you can go through a host agency. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I would say too that some people are agents for themselves. So some individuals want to manage their own individualized funding. It's not common, but there is a possibility of doing that. And they typically go host agency. I don't know of anybody who doesn't, but so the host agency supports the individual as their own agent to manage their own services and supports.
I see. Well, my next question is from the floor. It's pretty long, so if Proc can, So I've never understood what the criteria is for getting CLBC funding. No one has ever been able to answer this question. My son with ASD is now 23, considered ineligible for CLBC when he transitioned to adulthood, yet met many other individuals we know with similar functioning level to my son and family income were eligible. I would really appreciate a direct answer on how eligibility is determined. It is not based on diagnosis. So, yeah.
Patrice, I think you should take that one.
Yeah, well, someone should, first of all, someone should be able to tell you. We aim for also, absolute clarity. I mean, we have our policy, which is aligned to legislation. So it's very clear for us who is eligible or who is not. Sometimes, like for PSI, of course, it's going to be the diagnosis of FASD or ASD, and then confirmation of adaptive functioning that is at the 3 standard deviations below the mean, which is the Z score of 55, as we've mentioned. So if your son were not, and of course this is not, I'm speaking very generally, if you're welcome to come back to CLBC anytime and have your region revisit this and explain it to you. But if a person were to have an ASD diagnosis and be determined not to be eligible, then it would be because the adaptive did not meet that criterion. That's, and income, it's not income tested. So, he's an adult where so it's not about your family income. That would be like for us, or at least in my mind, it's very clear. It's just those 2 criteria. And the only thing that could, I mean, if perhaps your son's situation has changed, or perhaps in the determination of the adaptive functioning, you've had different psychologists who have understood his, his peers' adaptive functioning. But it's got to be one of those. But I really encourage you to go back to CLBC and say, well, explain it to me.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And my next question is, should families get on the list for home sharing residential services as soon as their family member turns 19?
I mean, I think it's worth a discussion with your facilitator about what your timing is. It doesn't mean that necessarily getting onto the request for service list if you're not going to need that service for a few years, but I think it is very much worth a discussion to say, okay, my son or daughter is turning age 19, in our discussions, we've all talked about, a typical move out age of 25 or something, and be able to have that discussion with your facilitator at the time and to keep them up to date, on a yearly basis. It's just, check in with them, let them know where you're at. One of the things that I really like about that planning document that's on the Key to Home bc.ca website is it also has a series of not only things to think about in terms of the housing itself, but what kind of skills and resources do you need to have to live independently or live independently with some support and things. So there's plenty of time to begin working on some of those skills, all towards that larger goal of having your own place or having a roommate and sharing a place with somebody. And so I would really encourage you to begin to work on those kinds of things. And then, and update your facilitator once a year and just say, hey, this is where we're at with it. We're still planning on this, or this has changed, and something has come up as a crisis, or something that's come up as an opportunity. So,
So if you don't get him on the list at 19, it doesn't make you get to the bottom of the list when he's like 35, right? So it's based on the needs.
We work on a fiscal year, and we do budget managing planning for each fiscal year.
Yeah.
So it's really important to start even now if you want to be on the next fiscal year. So for April 1st to May 31st. So if you want something in the next fiscal year, you should start having especially something like home shares, having conversation with your facilitator right now about it, to make sure you're considered for the next budget, next fiscal year. We also have a separate stream for requesting services, which is more the urgent requests. So we have the urgent requests, and then we have the planning, which we plan for each next fiscal year. So if you don't want something in the next year from April 2022, you probably don't need to be put on any lists. But like I said, it's good to have a conversation with a facilitator as soon as you're considering this. And then they'll directly you with each region of exactly how it's done. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that yeah,
so it doesn't mean
an idea of how about just planning.
The
how we
longer
plan.
you're on the list, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
And
not
then we
like
try to go down as far as
Okay.
possible on that list, and try to at least give something to people. Almost everyone on there. We try to.
I see.
It depends. Yeah.
Okay.
The other challenge we have too is just we don't, like everyone else, we wait until February to hear what budget we have next year. So you need to make sure that your facilitator is aware if you want something that, and when, and they'll lead you through the process for that for each region.
I see. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. The last question is, do you have a list of providers that can do adaptive function assessment you need, or any psychologist can do?
Susan, do you want to talk about how the regions do that?
So we don't have a list as a government body. We don't recommend, right? I suggest talking to other families who've gone through the process. Again, quite often I recommend contacting the resource parent at Family Services. One thing I do recommend too is when you go around asking about assessments done for CLBC purposes, is making sure you ask the psychologist that they are, if they are familiar with CLBC eligibility policy, and how familiar they are. Most psychologists who work in the field of autism are very aware of the CLBC eligibility policy.
So
Patrice, do you want to add anything? I'm just going to say, Patrice, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. The providers.
Again, you can always ask to talk to the eligibility facilitator in your region too. In some regions where it's smaller, there might be only one psychologist doing CLBC kind of things, policies, right? Or one or two. So yeah, I suggest, calling up any office and just asking to speak to the eligibility facilitator if you have any eligibility questions.
I guess what I said is that we do a lot of education of psychologists, and they're, for free. And so we cast quite a wide net. So pretty much if they're not familiar or comfortable with what we need, they will probably not do it. The ones, and they will refer you, I suspect.
Okay. So if one psychologist said you're at 60 at adaptive functioning, you can go to another psychologist for a second opinion with the 5 points.
People do.
Okay. I see. So yes, I think we don't have time for more questions today, but Susan is very kind to give out her contact. If you have any individual question that you want to ask about CLBC services and eligibility, and you can email Susan as susan.fasse, Fasse, @gov.bc.ca, or you can email it to me and I can pass it to Susan directly. And my email is lchow@autismbc.ca. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Say quickly, sorry,
Yep,
you can call the Vancouver office and just ask for my name.
Oh, okay. And
yeah,
Vancouver
that might be the easiest for everyone. I'm not in this week, so.
Okay.
Next
but
week,
they can leave a message, right? And yes, Susan's number is 604-375-7449, and no extension. Just ask for Susan Fasse. Okay. Thank you for coming and supporting us and give us a thorough information on CLBC eligibility. And until next time, bye everybody. And I look forward to chatting with you next time very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.